Hey guys, tonight we embark on a different kind of journey. We're not just looking at historical events, we're looking at the very source code of greatness. We're asking a simple question. How does a mere mortal, a creature of flesh and bone, rise to become a force of nature, a legend, a god among men? History tells us it's not a single path. Some achieve it through a sheer, almost terrifying explosion of personal ability. A brilliance so profound, it feels like a superpower. Others, they walk a razor's edge, staring into the abyss of uncertainty and betting their entire world on a single roll of the dice. They are the high-stakes gamblers of history. And then there are the quiet ones, the ghost in the machine. They don't rely on brute force or blind luck. They study the system, find its hidden cracks, and bring empires to their knees with a whisper. They are the hackers of history. So tonight, we explore these three paths to immortality. The path of impossible power, the path of audacious courage, and the path of subversive genius. Before we begin this epic trilogy, if you feel a connection to these kinds of stories, take a moment to hit that like and subscribe button. It's the fuel that keeps our explorations going. And I'd love to know who is joining this grand expedition. So drop your location in the comments below. It's always a thrill to see our global campfire light up. Alright, find a comfortable spot. Turn down the noise of the modern world. We are about to witness how mortals, through sheer force of will, can touch the divine. Our journey begins with the most dazzling path of all, the path of the Supermen. These are the individuals whose talents were so extreme, so far beyond the human norm, that it's the only word that fits. They didn't wear capes, but they reshaped the world as if they could. Our first Superman wasn't born on Krypton. He was born in a small town in Tuscany. He is a man whose name has become synonymous with genius itself. His superpower? Infinite intellect. This is Leonardo da Vinci. Let's be clear. Calling Leonardo a man of the Renaissance is like calling the Amazon a river. It's technically true, but it fails spectacularly to capture the scale of the phenomenon. Leonardo wasn't just a participant in the Renaissance. He was a one-man Renaissance, a walking, breathing universe of interconnected ideas. His brain did not recognize the boundaries that limit the rest of us. Art, science, engineering, anatomy, to him, they were all just different languages for describing the same beautiful, complex machine, the universe. Most of us struggle to master one field in a lifetime. Leonardo achieved world-class, history-defining mastery in at least half a dozen. As a painter, he gave us the haunting, enigmatic smile of the Mona Lisa and the divine drama of the Last Supper. But while holding the paintbrush in one hand, his other hand was sketching things that belonged 500 years in the future. In his famous notebooks, we see a mind operating on a completely different plane. He designed armored fighting vehicles, the precursor to the modern tank. He sketched flying machines, complete with flapping wings, years before the basic principles of aerodynamics were understood. He drew up plans for a submarine, a diving suit, and even a rudimentary robot. And then there was his obsession with the human body. This wasn't just an artist's curiosity. It was a scientist's quest. In an age when dissecting human corpses was taboo and dangerous, Leonardo secretly dissected over 30 bodies, peeling back the layers of muscle, tendon, and bone. The anatomical drawings he produced were so breathtakingly accurate, so detailed, that they remained the most precise representations of the human body for centuries. He was the first to accurately depict the human spine, the heart's valves, and the position of a fetus in the womb. He was doing the work of a modern medical illustrator with nothing but a scalpel, a pen, and a brain that saw the human body as the ultimate feat of engineering. This infinite intellect was fueled by a superpower even rarer than genius, insatiable, childlike curiosity. His notebooks are a testament to a mind that never stopped asking why. He wasn't just content to paint a flower. He had to understand its botany. He wasn't just content to see a bird fly. He had to deconstruct the physics of its wings. Describe the tongue of the woodpecker. One note to himself reads, "Why is the sky blue?" Another asks. He spent years studying the flow of water, the patterns of light, the mechanics of a cat's shoulder. His mind was a perpetual motion machine of inquiry. And to protect his thoughts, he even employed a kind of personal encryption, famously writing his notes in reverse script, from right to left, a mirror writing that could only be easily read with a mirror. It was as if his brain operated so fast, in such a unique way, that it required its own private language. He wasn't just a man of the Renaissance, he was a one-man Renaissance. His mind was a universe of interconnected ideas, living 500 years in the future. From the Superman of the mind, we turn to a Superman of sheer, relentless will. A man whose physical and mental energy was so boundless, it seemed to defy the laws of human biology. His superpower? Superhuman stamina. This is Napoleon Bonaparte. The legend of Napoleon is often focused on his strategic genius, his meteoric rise, his epic victories at Austerlitz. But underlying all of that was a biological engine that simply did not stop. In an age where campaigns were won and lost on the endurance of men and horses, Napoleon was a force of nature. He famously required incredibly little sleep, often functioning on just 3 or 4 hours a night for weeks on end. For him, sleep wasn't a necessity. It was an inconvenient interruption of his work. Imagine the scene. He could spend 18 hours in the saddle, riding through mud and rain, personally directing troop movements across a vast front. Upon arriving at his campaign tent, covered in grime and exhausted to the bone, his staff would collapse. But Napoleon, he would immediately begin his other job. He would dictate letters, review supply reports, and draft legislation for the governance of his sprawling empire, often working until dawn, fueled by nothing more than black coffee and an iron will. His energy was a strategic weapon. He could outmarch, outplan, and simply outwork any rival general on the continent. His famous blitzkrieg style of warfare, fast, decisive movements to surprise and overwhelm the enemy, was only possible because the man at the top never, ever got tired. His mental stamina was just as terrifying. His memory was photographic. He could recall the exact location and strength of dozens of different regiments scattered across Europe. He knew the names, histories, and capabilities of hundreds of his officers. He could absorb a complex battlefield map in a single glance and immediately identify its weaknesses and opportunities. There is a famous, if perhaps apocryphal, story of him demonstrating this power. While in his study, he allegedly dictated 7 different letters, on 7 completely different subjects, to 7 different secretaries, rotating between them without losing his train of thought on any single one. His brain wasn't just a processor. It was a multi-core supercomputer capable of running complex simulations for war, law, and politics simultaneously. This superhuman energy wasn't just for war. It was for nation building. The Napoleonic Code, the legal framework that still forms the basis of civil law in France and many other countries, was forged in marathon late-night sessions, with Napoleon himself actively participating, debating legal scholars on points of law with ferocious intensity. He didn't just command, he built. He reorganized France's bureaucracy, its education system, its infrastructure. He did it all with a relentless, 24/7 drive that left his contemporaries breathless. Sleep was an inconvenience he couldn't afford. He didn't conquer Europe on genius alone. He conquered it by simply outworking everyone else on the continent. But perhaps the purest form of superpower is not in the mind or in the relentless drive of a conqueror, but in the simple, brutal capacity of the human body to endure the impossible. Our final Superman is not a genius or an emperor. He was a messenger. His name has been lost to the fog of legend, but his feat is immortal. His superpower? Ultimate endurance. This is Phidippides, the runner of Marathon. The story, as passed down by ancient historians like Herodotus and Plutarch, is a testament to the absolute limits of human physiology. It's the year 490 BCE, and the mighty Persian Empire, the superpower of its day, has landed an invasion force on the plains of Marathon, just a short distance from Athens. The fledgling Athenian democracy is on the verge of being extinguished. They need help, desperately, so they turn to a man, a hemerodrome or day-long runner, a specialist messenger trained for extreme distance. This is Phidippides. His mission: run from Athens to Sparta, their rival city-state, to plead for military aid. This was not a jog down a paved road. This was a brutal, non-stop journey of approximately 150 miles, 240 kilometers, over rugged mountainous terrain. Pheidippides ran. He ran for 2 days straight, pushing his body past pain, past exhaustion, into a realm of pure will. He arrived in Sparta, delivered his desperate message, only to be told the Spartans were in the middle of a religious festival and, couldn't march until the next full moon. So what did he do? He turned around and ran all the way back to Athens, another 150 miles, to deliver the bad news. But the story doesn't end there. The Athenians, realizing they were on their own, marched to Marathon and, in one of the most stunning underdog victories in military history, they crushed the larger Persian force. But the battle was not the end of the war. The Persian fleet, defeated on land, was now sailing to attack the undefended city of Athens itself. The Athenian army had to race back. But more importantly, the news of the victory had to reach the city first, to quell the panic and rally the citizens. Once again, they turned to a runner. The legend, which has likely merged the stories of several runners into one heroic figure, says it was Pheidippides. Having just completed a 300-mile round trip, he was tasked with one final run, from the battlefield of Marathon to the city of Athens, a distance of about 26 miles, 42 kilometers. It was a final, desperate sprint. He ran with the last ounces of his strength, his lungs burning, his heart pounding. He burst into the Athenian assembly, gasped out one triumphant phrase, "Nenekamin, we have won." And then, his mission complete, his body finally giving out, he collapsed and died on the spot. He wasn't just a messenger. He was a human message, a testament to how far a person can push their body when the fate of their city is on the line. His final run became the inspiration for the modern marathon race, a tribute to a man whose endurance transcended the limits of flesh and blood and became legend. These supermen of history, they didn't have capes or magic rings. Their superpower was the raw, untapped potential that lies within all of us, magnified to a terrifying, awe-inspiring degree. They show us what's possible when the human mind, the human will, and the human body are pushed to their absolute breaking point, and then go one step further. But not all of history's great figures relied on innate, godlike ability. Some stared into the void of pure chance, where genius and stamina mean nothing, and made their mark with a different kind of power, the courage to bet it all. We now leave the realm of the supermen and step up to the high-stakes table of the gamblers. The gamblers of history, the monarchs who bet their empires. But not all of history's great figures relied on innate, godlike ability. Some stared into the void of pure chance, where genius and stamina mean nothing, and made their mark with a different kind of power, the courage to bet it all. We now leave the realm of the supermen and step up to the high-stakes table of history's greatest gamblers. These aren't your cautious, calculating leaders. These are the monarchs who looked at their entire kingdom, pushed it into the center of the table, and with ice in their veins, said, "All in." They knew that history doesn't always reward the strongest or the smartest. Sometimes, it rewards the boldest. Our first gambler is a queen who sat down at the poker table of 16th century Europe holding what looked like a losing hand, only to bluff, scheme, and outplay every king who dared to challenge her. She was the master of the long con, the ultimate poker face. This is Elizabeth I of England. When Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1558, her situation was less than enviable. It was a complete mess. England was a second-rate power, financially broke, and torn apart by violent religious strife between Catholics and Protestants. To the south lay France, a powerful rival. To the west lay Spain, a global superpower fueled by the gold of the New World, ruled by the fiercely Catholic Philip II, who happened to be her former brother-in-law and saw her as an illegitimate heretic. Elizabeth's position was precarious. She was a woman in a man's world, a Protestant queen in a Europe dominated by Catholic giants. A direct confrontation would have been suicide. So, she didn't fight. She gambled. Her greatest chip, and her most brilliant gamble, was her own hand in marriage. For over 2 decades, she played a masterful game of will she, won't she, with the princes of Europe. Was she going to marry the French Duke of Anjou? Or perhaps the Spanish Archduke Charles? She entertained ambassadors, exchanged portraits, and drafted marriage contracts, all while having absolutely no intention of marrying any of them. It was a breathtakingly cynical and effective bluff. By keeping both France and Spain dangling on the hope of a marital alliance, she made them rivals for her affection rather than allies against her. Neither side dared to attack England for fear of pushing her into the arms of the other. It was a diplomatic masterclass in playing two ends against the middle, buying her weak kingdom precious years to heal, grow, and build its strength. But she wasn't just bluffing. She was also playing a riskier, off-the-books game. She couldn't afford a war with Spain, but she could afford to let others fight it for her. She secretly funded Protestant rebels in the Spanish-controlled Netherlands. And most audaciously, she gave her tacit blessing to a generation of English sea dogs, men like Sir Francis Drake. To the Spanish, they were pirates. To Elizabeth, they were a low-cost, high-yield investment. Drake and his kind would raid Spanish colonies, plunder their treasure fleets laden with silver and gold, and bring a share of the loot back to the Queen's coffers. It was a state-sponsored protection racket on a global scale. If a raid succeeded, the Crown profited handsomely. If a captain was caught, he was a pirate, and the Queen could deny everything. It was a perfect, deniable gamble that weakened her greatest enemy while enriching her own kingdom. But eventually, every gambler faces the final showdown. By 1588, Philip II of Spain had had enough. He assembled the largest naval force Europe had ever seen, the Invincible Armada, to crush England once and for all. This was the moment Elizabeth's long con came due. On paper, England stood no chance. But Elizabeth, facing the ultimate all-in moment, didn't flinch. She rode out to her troops at Tilbury, clad in a silver breastplate, and delivered one of the most iconic speeches in English history, declaring, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." She was betting on her people, on her commanders, and on the home field advantage. And the gamble paid off. A combination of superior English naval tactics, including the terrifying use of fire ships, and a ferocious storm, the famous Protestant wind, shattered the Armada. She sat at the poker table of Europe with a terrible hand, but bluffed her way to becoming the queen of the game. From a queen who played a masterful game of deception, we turn to a czar who didn't want to just win the game. He wanted to smash the table to pieces and build a new one. He didn't bluff. He raised the stakes so high he forced everyone else to fold or be destroyed. He was the master of the revolutionary bet. This is Peter the Great of Russia. When Peter took full control of Russia at the end of the 17th century, he wasn't ruling an empire. He was ruling a medieval relic. It was a vast, deeply conservative and technologically backward nation, isolated from the scientific and cultural currents of Western Europe. Its nobles were resistant to change, its army was archaic, and its face was turned inward. Peter saw this not as a heritage to be preserved, but as a disease to be cured, and he was ready to perform radical surgery. His gamble was not for territory or wealth. It was for the very soul of his nation. His first move was a bet of pure, insane ambition. He decided Russia needed a new capital. Not an improved Moscow, but a city built from scratch on a desolate, mosquito-infested swamp he had just conquered from the Swedes. This would be St. Petersburg, his window to the west. It was a monumental gamble. The project cost tens of thousands of lives, consumed a vast portion of the state's treasury, and was built on land that flooded annually. He forced nobles to abandon their ancestral homes in Moscow and build palaces in this cold, damp, unfinished city. He was betting that by physically moving the center of power, he could mentally and culturally reorient the entire nation toward Europe. And that was just the beginning. His bets became deeply personal and brutally enforced. He saw the traditional long beards and flowing robes of the Russian boyars not as a custom, but as a symbol of the backwardness he despised. So what did he do? He instituted a beard tax. If you wanted to keep your beard, you had to pay. If you refused, Peter himself was known to personally and violently shave nobles with his own hands. He forced them to adopt Western dress, to hold European-style salons, to learn to dance the minuet. This wasn't a fashion statement. It was a cultural revolution by decree. He was betting that he could, by sheer force of will, drag his people kicking and screaming into the 18th century. But his biggest gamble was on the battlefield. To secure his window to the west, he needed a coastline on the Baltic Sea. The only problem was that the Baltic was controlled by the Swedish Empire, a military juggernaut led by the brilliant warrior king Charles XII. In 1700, Peter launched the Great Northern War. His newly modernized but inexperienced army was utterly crushed by the Swedes at the Battle of Narva. Any normal ruler would have sued for peace. But Peter was not a normal ruler. He saw the humiliating defeat not as an end, but as a very expensive lesson. He doubled down. He retreated into the vastness of Russia, sacrificing land and men, while furiously rebuilding his army along western lines. He melted church bells to cast new cannons. He studied, he adapted, he waited. He was playing the long game, betting that Russia's immense size and population, its only real assets, could eventually wear down the smaller, more brilliant Swedish army. For 21 grueling years, the war raged. Finally, at the Battle of Poltava in 1709, Peter's new army decisively crushed the Swedes, breaking their power forever. The bet had paid off. Russia was now a major European power. He didn't just play the game. He flipped the table over, built a new one facing west, and forced everyone to learn a new set of rules. From a czar who bet on the future, we come to a man who became the very definition of the point of no return. He faced a single, defining moment, a choice between ruin and rebellion, and he made a bet so total, so absolute, it became the most famous gamble in Western history. His game wasn't a long con or a revolution. It was a single, definitive hand of political all-in. This is Julius Caesar. The year is 49 BCE. For the past decade, Caesar has been campaigning in Gaul, conquering vast territories, amassing incredible wealth, and forging one of the most loyal, battle-hardened armies in Roman history. He is a national hero, a populist icon. And back in Rome, the Senate is terrified of him. Led by his former ally and now bitter rival, Pompey the Great, the conservative faction of the Senate sees Caesar's popularity and his private army as a mortal threat to the Republic. So they issue him an ultimatum: disband your army, relinquish your command, and return to Rome as a private citizen. It was a political death sentence, and Caesar knew it. If he returned to Rome without his legions, his enemies would immediately prosecute him on trumped-up charges and strip him of everything he had. The choice was stark. He was standing on the bank of a small river in northern Italy, the Rubicon. This river marked the legal boundary of his province. To cross it with an army was an act of treason, an explicit declaration of war against the state. This was his moment. To obey was certain ruin. To cross was an unimaginable gamble. He would be pitting his single, undersized legion against the full might of the Roman state, which was commanded by the legendary Pompey. The odds were, by any rational calculation, against him. For a moment, history held its breath on that riverbank. Then, as the ancient historian Suetonius tells us, Caesar turned to his men and uttered the immortal words, Alia iacta est. The die is cast. He crossed the river. This was the ultimate all-in. He wasn't just betting his career. He was betting his life, the lives of his men, and the very future of the Roman Republic on a single, irreversible action. There was no going back, no negotiation. From that moment on, it was victory or death. And Caesar's gambling style was built on one principle: breathtaking speed. He knew his only chance was to move so fast that his opponents, who had far greater resources, wouldn't have time to react. He didn't march on Rome. He fell upon it like a thunderbolt. He raced down the Italian peninsula, his single legion moving at a pace no one thought possible. Cities surrendered to him without a fight, charmed by his clemency or terrified by his velocity. Pompey and the Senate, stunned by the speed of his advance, panicked. They abandoned Rome, then Italy itself, fleeing east to Greece to try and gather their forces. In a matter of weeks, Caesar, the underdog gambler, had seized the entire Italian peninsula without a major battle. Caesar didn't calculate odds. He created them. He rolled the dice on the fate of Rome, and the world has been living with the result ever since. These gamblers of history teach us a different lesson about greatness. It's not always about having the best cards. Sometimes, it's about having the courage to play the hand you're dealt with absolute conviction. But what if there's a third path? A path that relies neither on superhuman ability nor on audacious gambles, but on something quieter, subtler, and perhaps even more powerful. We now leave the gambler's table and enter the world of the system, the code, and the ghosts in the machine. It is time to meet the hackers of history. The hackers of history, those who broke the system. These gamblers of history teach us a different lesson about greatness. It's not always about having the best cards. Sometimes, it's about having the courage to play the hand you're dealt with absolute conviction. But what if there's a third path? A path that relies neither on superhuman ability nor on audacious gambles, but on something quieter, subtler, and perhaps even more powerful. We now leave the gambler's table and enter the world of the system, the code, and the ghosts in the machine. It is time to meet the hackers of history. These are not the rebels who smash the system with a sledgehammer. They are the quiet geniuses who study the system's architecture, find its hidden backdoors, its forgotten subroutines, and its logical fallacies. They don't break the rules. They bend them, exploit them, and turn the system's own power against itself. They are the ultimate subversives. Our first hacker didn't lead an army. He was a quiet, tormented monk armed with a hammer, some nails, and a revolutionary idea. He faced the most powerful, monolithic system of his day, the 16th century Catholic Church. His hack would reboot Western civilization. This is Martin Luther. The system Luther confronted was a closed-source spiritual monopoly. For 1,000 years, the Church was the sole operating system of European society, controlled not just faith, but law, knowledge, and, most importantly, the pathway to salvation. The Pope was the system administrator with ultimate root access. And by the early 1500s, this system had developed a lucrative piece of malware: the sale of indulgences. An indulgence was a certificate you could buy from the church that promised to reduce the time you or your loved ones spent in purgatory. It was, in modern terms, a pay-to-win scheme for the afterlife. Luther, a devout theologian, saw this not just as corruption, but as a critical system vulnerability. He started studying the system's source code, the Bible, and he found a profound discrepancy. The Bible, as he read it, said salvation was a direct gift from God, granted through faith alone. It didn't mention anything about buying your way out of divine punishment. The church had essentially written its own proprietary code over the original and was charging users for a feature that should have been free. So, how do you attack a system that powerful? You don't. You perform a penetration test. In 1517, Luther wrote his 95 Theses, a list of academic arguments against indulgences. This was his exploit script. He didn't intend to start a revolution. He intended to start a debate among fellow academics. He famously nailed it to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church, which served as a kind of university bulletin board. But then Luther deployed a revolutionary new technology, the equivalent of a zero-day exploit that the church had no defense against: the printing press. Luther's allies took his theses, translated them from academic Latin into common German, and printed thousands of copies. Suddenly, his complex theological argument went viral. It was a distributed denial of service, DDoS, attack on the church's authority. Papal decrees took months to circulate. Luther's ideas spread across Germany in weeks. But his ultimate hack was yet to come. The church's real firewall was information control. The Bible was in Latin, unreadable to 99% of the population. People could only access God's word through the church's approved API, the priests and bishops. Luther decided to give everyone direct root access. He undertook the monumental task of translating the entire Bible into German. For the first time, ordinary people could read the source code for themselves. They could bypass the central server of the church and establish a direct, personal connection to the divine. He effectively open-sourced salvation. The system of papal monopoly, once thought unbreachable, was fundamentally broken, not by force, but by a simple act of translation and distribution. He didn't tear down the church with an army. He brought it to its knees with a printing press and an idea that every man could be his own priest. From a man who hacked religion, we turn to a man who hacked the very definition of political power. He faced a system, the Roman Republic, whose core programming had one unbreakable rule, one fatal command: abort if king detected. His predecessor, Julius Caesar, had ignored that rule and suffered a fatal system crash. This man, his adopted son, learned from that. He wouldn't crash the system. He would become its administrator while making it look like he was just another user. He was the master of the privilege escalation hack. This is Augustus. When Octavian, later known as Augustus, emerged as the sole ruler of Rome after decades of brutal civil war, he faced a paradox. The Roman people craved peace and stability, but they were pathologically allergic to the word king, rex. The Republic, with its senators and consuls, was a deeply cherished ideal, even if it had become a dysfunctional, bloody mess. How do you become a king without anyone calling you one? You don't seize power. You have it granted to you, piece by piece, using the system's own rules. Augustus's hack was a masterpiece of social engineering. He began not with a power grab, but with an act of supreme political theater. In 27 BCE, he dramatically restored the Republic, formally handing all his extraordinary powers back to the Senate and the Roman people. It was a gesture of profound humility, and it was a complete lie. The Senate, terrified of more civil war and grateful for the peace he had brought, immediately begged him to reconsider. And so the hack began. They persuaded him to accept a collection of powers, all of which were perfectly legal and traditional within the Republican framework. First, they gave him consular command over the key provinces, Spain, Gaul, and Syria, where most of the Roman legions were stationed. This gave him control of the entire military, but he wasn't a military dictator. He was just a proconsul. Next, they granted him the power of a tribune of the plebs for life. This was a brilliant move. The tribunes were historically the protectors of the common people, and their greatest power was the veto. This meant Augustus could block any law or decree he didn't like, giving him negative control over the entire government. But he wasn't a tyrant. He was the protector of the people. He took on the title princeps, meaning first citizen. It was a title of respect, not of command. It implied he was merely the most distinguished among equals. Finally, they gave him the name Augustus, the revered one, a title with religious overtones but no legal authority. Look at what he did. He never created a new office called emperor. He simply collected all the most powerful existing administrator permissions under his single user account. The user interface of the state remained republican. The Senate still met. Consuls were still elected. The old institutions still appeared to function. But it was a theme. The back-end code had been completely rewritten. Every critical function, every line of power now resolved to him. He had achieved absolute power while meticulously maintaining the illusion of the Republic. He didn't break the system. He hollowed it out from the inside and wore its skin like a suit. He hacked the Republic by never claiming to destroy it. He built a monarchy and called it a restoration, the most brilliant political sleight of hand in history. So here we stand, at the end of our journey, having witnessed three profoundly different paths to a kind of earthly immortality. We began with the Supermen like Leonardo and Napoleon. They were forces of nature, men whose innate abilities, their intellect, their stamina were so overwhelming, they seemed to operate on a different plane of existence. They represent the power of raw, concentrated human potential, the idea that one person's talent can be so immense it bends the world to its will. Then we met the gamblers like Elizabeth and Caesar. They weren't necessarily born with superior gifts, but they possessed something just as rare, an almost insane courage. They understood that history pivots on moments of profound uncertainty, and in those moments, they weren't afraid to bet everything on a single, audacious move. They represent the power of human will in the face of chaos, the triumph of guts over calculation. And finally, we encountered the hackers like Luther and Augustus, the quietest yet perhaps the most dangerous of all. They show us that the greatest power doesn't come from overpowering the system or gambling against it, but from understanding it so intimately that you can make it do things it was never designed to do. They represent the power of subversive genius, the ultimate triumph of intellect over brute force. Power, courage, and intellect. The Superman, the gambler, and the hacker. 3 archetypes, 3 methods, all leading to the same destination. A place in the pages of history so profound that it borders on the divine. They teach us that there is more than one way to leave a mark on the world. You can be the storm that flattens the forest, the lone tree that stands against the hurricane, or the seed that silently grows in the cracks of a foundation until the entire structure comes crumbling down. Each path is a testament to the limitless and often terrifying capacity of the human spirit. The question they leave for us is not which path is best, but to recognize the patterns when we see them in the past, in the present, and perhaps most importantly, in ourselves.